Hello students, we're going to be doing a read aloud this summer called Swamplandia. Here's the book by Karen Russell. It's about a amusement park named Swamplandia and the family that lives there. So we're going to read chapter 1 today, and upcoming videos will have other chapters. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. The beginning of the end is chapter 1. Our mother performed in starlight. Whose innovation this was, I never discovered. Probably it was Chief Big Tree's idea, and it was a good one. To blank the following spot and let a sharp moon cut across the sky, unchaperoned. To kill the microphone, to leave the stage lights, rin eyelids scrolled, and give the tourists in the stands a chance to enjoy the darkness of our island. To encourage the whole stadium to gulp air along with Swamplandia's star performer, the world-famous alligator wrestler, Hilola Bigtree. 4 times a week, our mother climbed the ladder above the gator pit in a green 2-piece bathing suit and stood at the edge of the diving board breathing. If it was windy, her long hair flew around her face, but the rest of her stayed motionless. Nights in the swamp were dark and star-leopard. Our island was 30-odd miles off the grid of mainland lights, and although your naked eye could easily find the ball of Venus and the sapphire hairs of the Pleiades, our mother's body was just lines, a smudge against the palm trees. Somewhere directly below Hilola Bigtree, dozens of alligators pushed their icicle overbites and the awesome diamonds of their heads through over 300,000 gallons of filtered water. In the deep end, the black cone where Mom dove was 27 feet at its shallowest point. The water tapered to 4 inches of muck that lapped at coppery sand. A small spoil island rose out of the center of the pit, a 1/4 acre of dredged limestone. During the day, 30 gators at a time crawled into a living mountain on the rocks to sun themselves. The stadium that housed the gator pit seated 265 tourists. 8 tiered rows ringed the watery pen. A seat near the front put you at eye level with our gators. My older sister, Osceola, and I watched our mother's show from the stands. When Ossie leaned forward, I leaned with her. At the entrance to the gator pit, our father, the chief, had nailed up a crate-board sign, "You watchers in the first 4 rows guaranteed to get wet." Just below this, our mother had added in her small, livid lettering, "Anybody could get hurt." The tourists moved springily from one side to the other in the stands, slapping at the ubiquitous mosquitoes, unsticking their khaki shorts and printed department store skirts from their sweating legs. They shushed and crushed against and cursed at one another. Couples curled their pale legs together, beer spilled, and kids wept. At last, the chief queued up the music. Trumpets tooted from our big old-fashioned speakers, and the huge unseeing eye of the follow spot twisted through the palm fronds until it found Hilda. So the follow spot is a spotlight that follows Hilda when she does her act. Fame settled on her like a film. "Hilola Bigtree, ladies and gentlemen," my dad shouted into the microphone. Her shoulder blades pinched back like wings before she dove. The lake was planked with great gray and black bodies. Hilola Bigtree had to hit the water with perfect precision, making incremental adjustments mid-air to avoid the gators. The chief's follow spot cast a light like a rime of ice onto the murk, and Mom swam inside this circle across the entire length of the lake. People screamed and pointed whenever an alligator swam into the spotlight with her, a plump and switching tail cutting suddenly into its margarine wavelengths. The spade of a monstrous face jawing up at her side. Our mother swam blissfully on, brushing at the spotlight's perimeter as if she were testing the gate of a floating corral. Like black silk, the water bunched and wrinkled. Her arms rode hard. You could hear her breaststrokes rippling at the water, her gasps for air. Now and then a pair of coal-red eyes snagged at the white net of the spotlight as the chief rolled it over the pit. 3 long minutes passed, then 4. At last, she gasped mightily and grasped the ladder rails on the eastern side of the stage. We all exhaled with her. Our stage wasn't much, just a simple cypress board on 6-foot stilts that suspended over the great gator pit. She climbed out of the lake, her trembling arms folded over the dimple of her belly button. She spat water, gave a little wave. The crowd went crazy. When the light found her a second time, Hello the Big Tree, the famous woman from the posters, the swamp centaur, was gone. Our mother was herself again, smiling, brown-skinned, muscular, a little thicker through the waist and hips than she appeared on those early posters, she liked to joke, since she had her 3 kids. Mom, Ossie and I would squeal, racing around the wire fence and over the wet cement that ringed the gator pit to get to her before the autograph seekers elbowed us out. You won! My family, the Big Tree tribe of the 10,000 islands, once lived on a 100-acre island off the coast of southwest Florida, on the Gulf side of the Great Swamp. For many years, Swamplandia was the #1 gator-themed park and swamp cafe in the area. We leased an expensive billboard on the interstate just south of Cape Coral. Come see Seth, fang some sea serpent and ancient lizard of death. We called all our alligators Seth. Tradition is as important, kids, Chief Big Tree liked to say, as promotional materials are expensive. The billboard featured a 10-foot alligator, one of the Seths, hissing soundlessly, its jaws agape to reveal the rosebud pink of a queen conch shell. Its scales were a wet-looking black. We Big Trees are kneeling around the primordial monster in reverse order of height. My father the chief, my grandfather Sawtooth, my mother Hilola, my older brother Kiwi, my sister Osceola, and finally me. We are wearing Indian costumes on loan from our Big Tree gift shop, buckskin vests, cloth headbands, great blue hair and feathers, great white hair and feathers, chubby beads hanging off our foreheads, and our hair in braids, gator fang necklaces. Although there was not a drop of Seminole or Miccosukee blood in us, the chief always costumed us in tribal apparel for the photographs he took. He said we were our own Indians. Our mother had a toast brown complexion that a tourist could maybe squint and call Indian, and Kiwi Grandpa Sawtooth and I could hold our son. But my sister Osceola was born snowy, not a weak chamomile blood, but pure frost, with eyes that vibrated somewhere between maroon and violet. Her face was like our mother's face, cast forward into cloudy water. Before we posed for the picture on that billboard, our mother colored her in with drugstore blusher. The chief made sure she was covered by the shadow of a tree. Kiwi liked to joke that she looked like the doomed sibling you see in those Wild West daguerreotypes, the one who makes you think, oh no, take the picture quick, that kid is not long for this world. Our park housed 98 captive alligators in the gator pit. We also had a reptile walk, a 2-mile-long boardwalk through the Paratus palms and sawgrass that my grandfather and father designed and built. There you could see caimans, gharials, Burmese and African pythons, every variety of tree frog, a burrow hole of red-bellied turtles, and lachrymose morning glories, and a rare Cuban crocodile, Methuselah, a croc that was such an expert of mimic of a log that it moved only once in my presence, when its white jaw fell open like a suitcase. We had one mammal, Judy Garland, a small, balding Florida brown bear, who had been rescued as a cub by my grandparents, back when bears still roamed the pine woods of the northern swamp. Judy Garland's fur looked like a scorched rug. My brother said she had ursine alopecia. She could do a trick, sort of. The chief had trained her to nod along to Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Everybody, without exception, hated this trick. Her ahs, nods, terrified small children and shocked their parents. Somebody help, this bear is having a seizure, the park guests would cry. The bear had bad rhythm, but we had to keep her, said the chief. The bear was family. Our park had an advertising campaign that was on par with the best of the aqua slide attractions and the miniature golf courses. We had the cheapest beer in a 3-county radius, and we had wrestling shows 365 days a year. Rain or shine, no federal holidays, no Christian or pagan interruptions. We Big Trees had our problems too, of course, like anybody. Swamplandia had been under siege from several enemy forces, natural and corporate, for most of my short lifetime. We islanders worried about the menace of Melaleuca woods. The Melaleuca, or paperback paperbark tree was an exotic invasive species that was draining huge tracts of our swamp to the northeast. And everybody had one eye on the sly encroachment of the suburbs and Big Sugar in the south. But it always seemed to me like my family was winning. We had never been defeated by the Seths. Every Saturday evening and most weeknights of our childhoods, our mom performed the Swimming with the Seths act, and she always won. For 1,000 shows, we watched our mother sink into black water, rise. For 1,000 nights, we watched the green diving board quaking in the air in the bright wake of her. And then our mom got sick. Sicker than a person should ever be allowed to get. I was 12 when she got her diagnosis, and I was furious. There is no justice and no logic, the cancer doctors cooed around me. I don't remember the exact word they used, but I could not decode a note of hope. One of the nurses brought me chocolate duds from the vending machine that stuck in my throat. These doctors were always stooping to talk to us, or so it seemed to me, like every doctor on her ward was a giant 7 or 8 feet tall. Mom fell through the last stages of her cancer at a frightening speed. My spot. Sorry. Oh, she no longer resembled our mother. Her head got soft and bald like a baby's head. We had to watch her sink into her own face. One night she dove and she didn't come back. Air cloaked the hole that she left, and it didn't once tremble, no bubbles. It seemed she really wasn't going to surface. The Lola Jane Bigtree, world-class alligator wrestler, terrible cook, mother of 3, died in a dryland hospital bed in West Davie on an overcast Wednesday, March 10th at 3:12 p.m. The beginning of the end can feel a lot like the middle when you're living in it. When I was a kid, I couldn't see any of these ridges. It was only after Swamplandia's fall that time folded into a story with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. If you're short on time, that would be the 2-word version of our story, we fell. I was 13 years old when the end of Swamplandia began in earnest, although at first I was oblivious of the dangers we now faced. Mom was dead, so I thought the worst had already happened to us. I didn't realize that one tragedy can beget another, and another. Bright-eyed disasters flooding out of a death hole like bats out of a cave. 9 months had gone by since Mom's passing. The chief had not done anything to alert the tourists beyond a small obituary that ran in the Loomis Register. Her name was still listed in every Florida guidebook. Her face was on our billboards and gift store merchandise. Her Swimming with the Seths act was just about synonymous with Swamplandia itself. Below the Bigtree was the lodestar that pulled our visored, sweaty visitors across the water. So then I had to break some pretty bad news. We lost our headliner, I told them, gesturing vaguely, as if Hello the Bigtree were of no specific relation to me. But not to worry, I was quick to assure them. I'm Ava Bigtree. I'm her understudy. So you'll still get to see a world-class alligator wrestling show. The tourists would frown down at me or briefly touch my shoulders. That man over there, in the feathers, he said the wrestler was your mother? I held very still. I shut my eyes as whole shuddering flocks of hands descended. Wings brushed the damp hair off my cheeks. When some other kid's mother asked me how I was doing, I'd say, well, ma'am, the show must go on. I'd overheard Kiwi saying this to a group of mainland teenagers in a tone that flicked ash. If a tourist knelt to hug me, I tried to smile. Be kind to kind people, Ava, the chief said. They are going to want to talk to you about her. But you know what? No one really did. Not after I told them what had killed her. I think they were hoping to hear that Hello the Bigtree had been attacked by her gators. They were after a little hot air. Bones crushed, fangs closed around the throat, and an unlucky vent of blood. It was interesting to watch the tourists' reactions when I said the words cancer. Cancer was banal enough, but they were forced to adjust their response. Cancer? How awful. How old was she? 36. The tourist lady said, oh, or I'm sorry, and squeezed me harder. Most of the husbands drew back a few steps. Cancer, I could tell, did not impress these guys in the least. Most tourists sat through the show after we announced Hello Bigtree's death, but a few asked for their money back. Those who had traveled the shortest distances always seemed, for some reason, to be the angriest. The Loomis bingo and high-lie set, these ladies behaved as if her mother's death had somehow cheated them. This was our Tuesday outing, those blue-haired women whined. They had paid good money to see Hello the Bigtree do her Swimming with the Seths act. They didn't take a 40-minute ferry ride to eat corn dogs with some big lizards and some extremely sorry-looking children. Death was another kind of weather to those ancients, the chief explained to me and my sister. As ordinary as a rain delay. If they make a big stink, girls, you comp their gator tuts. I came to hate the complainers with their dry and crumbly lipsticks and their wrinkled rage and their stupid, flaccid old people sun hats with brims the breadth of Saturn's rings. I whispered to Ossie that I wanted to see the register for Death's airplane. Who was boarding the plane in such a stupid order? The chief made up a shut-your-crone-face consolation package that we were supposed to give to the outraged senior people seeking refunds. The consolation package contained a foam alligator hat designed to look like it was eating your head, a crystal flamingo necklace, 50 green and amber Seth toothpicks in a collector case, and a souvenir flipbook of our mother. If you turn the pages quickly enough, Mother moved like a primitive cartoon. First she dove, then her body tore a green seam down the center of the artificial lake. But my sister and I figured out that if you flipped it in the opposite direction, just as fast, our mom zipped backwards. Then the pit bubbles floated inward to form a smooth, undisturbed lake, and Mom landed on the diving board, her high dive reversing itself in a shimmering arc. She flew like a rock, unbreaking a window. Glass fused, and then you were at the little books beginning again. Who could complain after watching this? For some reason, the tourists seemed depressed by this trick. More than one Hill of the Big Tree flipbook ended up in the park's mesh trash cans. Within a month of her funeral, people were calling the chief to cancel our annual passes, and many more of Swamplandia's regular visitors simply stopped coming. Mom wasn't the only Big Tree wrestler we were missing. Grandpa Sawtooth had vanished that year, too. He was still alive, but the chief had exiled him to the mainland about a month before Mom died. The chief had installed Grandpa Sawtooth in an assisted living facility called Out to Sea Retirement Community. A temporary thing, the chief had assured us kids, just until we tied up some loose ends on our island. We missed Grandpa, but he didn't miss us. During his last days on the island, he had more than once gotten lost inside our house. He still knew our names sometimes, but he could not match them to our faces. His memory winked on and off with the weird, erratic energy of a light bulb in a torment. We had seen Grandpa Sawtooth exactly once since his move. A few weeks after he got settled in, we spent 22 minutes in his cabin at this out-to-sea facility. Through Grandpa's portal, you could see the abridged ocean, lassoed in glass, and a low stone seawall. Inside the retirement boat, no music played, no living lizards curled tails along the walls, and the lights were halogen. The chief kept promising us another trip to Loomis to visit him. As soon as I muck out the gator pit, kids, and as soon as I get a cage and rigging done on that airboat. By December, we'd stopped asking. I remember clearly the first time I saw the face of our enemy. It was on a Thursday in January, 10 months and 2 weeks after Mom's death. A huge thunderstorm had rolled over the islands that afternoon, and the living room was unusually dark. I had been lulled into a half-awake state by I Love Lucy marathon on Channel 6. Grandpa's rabbit-eared TV was crackling like water, and I kept dozing off on the couch and getting my senses all tangled, dreaming about the storm had moved inside. Then the TV screen went entirely black, and a baritone voice intoned, "The world of darkness comes to Loomis." I was glued to the set. Plaid-vested schoolchildren lined up to enter the gaping doors of what appeared to be a giant amusement park. The camera followed them down a narrow walkway, the tongue of the Leviathan, an announcer called it. The tongue appeared to be a sort of 30-foot electric traction escalating slide, covered in sponge and pink mesh, visibly slick. It gulped whole grades of kids into the park. The camera zoomed forward to give a teaser glimpse of the interior of the Leviathan, a scale model of a whale's belly, lit up by a series of green lights on a timer, so that it looked to my untrained eye like some kind of alien cafeteria. Then the TV flashed to a keyhole peek of riders disappearing down the tongue. For a few seconds, the screen went black again, and the TV speakers burbled with cetaceous noises of digestion. Then school kids screaming, "We love the world," on somebody's cue, disappeared down a neon tube. "Wow," said the chief. "How much do you think this piece of nothing commercial cost?" Swamplandia had never done a TV spot. The World of Darkness was located in southwest Loomis County, just off the highway ramp. The camera pulled back to reveal imbricating parking lots, a whole spooling solar system of parking lots. On its western edge, the Leviathan touched a green checkerboard of suburban lawns. A moat of lava lapped at the carports. The houses at the world's perimeter looked small and wet and vexed. The world of darkness offered things that Swamplandia could not. Escalator tours of the rings of hell, blood-red swimming pools, boiling colas, easy access to the mainland roads. Can the world of darkness really do that, Chief? I asked my dad. Move right into the middle of a city? The chief had stopped watching. He was draining a gulch brandy and cola in the deep crease of our couch. Don't let me catch you falling for that stuff, Ava. Who's going to pay a day's wage to slide down a tongue? That's about the stupidest thing I ever heard of. You go touch your Seth's belly scales and remind yourself who's got the real Leviathans. One Tuesday in late January, just a week or two after the World of Darkness's grand opening, the morning ferry failed to show. In an ordinary weekday, the double-decker ferry departed from the Loomis County Ferry Port at 9:05 and arrived at our park's landing a few minutes after 10 o'clock. The orange boat linked Swamplandia to the mainland. We had no bridge system and no road access, so the ferry was our lifeline, the only way for tourists to get to our park. The 26-mile trip took 40 minutes in good weather and could take as much as an hour and a half in rough water. The service was a vestige of the frontier days, when it connected a handful of drifters and homesteaders scattered throughout the 10,000 islands to the mainland. The majority of the 10,000 islands were still uninhabited, and there were just 4 stops on the original 35-mile loop: Swamplandia, Gallinule Key, Carpenter Key, and the Red Eagle Key fishing camp. Our nearest neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Gianetti, had an avocado farm on Gallinule Key, a 15-meter airboat ride to the south. The chief was on all fours when I found him. He was in the empty stadium making some adjustment to the pit pump. He was wearing a mainland t-shirt that said, Alabama Cardinals. This was from his civilian wardrobe. Without his radiant ropes and beads and feathers, you could see his pale scalp through a scrim of scant black hair. Color had ripened in twin spots on his stubbled cheeks, which made him look a little like a haggard Shirley Temple. The chief had to drain and clean the pit every 10 days because the Seths were undainty eaters. We fed them a commercial diet, which we ordered from Louisiana breeders, mostly chicken and fish, but occasionally more whimsical proteins: frozen nutria, muskrat, beavers, horse. The Seths regurgitated bones and feathers. Once after a hurricane, we pulled the bars of a tiny rib cage out of the leafy deep end. They were a crumbly, dark honey color. Forensic arguments erupted over green peas and meatloaf at our own table. A key deer, Sammy, shouted Grandpa. Nuh-uh, Pops, the chief disagreed. My guess, those bones belong to a dog. Some poor mutt went for a swim. Pass the gravy, honey? On Live Chicken Thursdays, a very popular and macabre attraction, the Seths jumped 5 feet out of the pit to snatch the cloud-white hens suspended above them, tied by their talons to a clothesline. The Seths drowned and ate these chickens in an underwater cyclone called the Death Roll, while tourists snapped photographs. Live Chicken Thursday was a Big Tree tradition dating back to 1942. The ritual was Grandpa Sawtooth's brainchild. I think my family traumatized generations of children and old women. And we girls must have inherited our forebears' immunity to gore, because Ossie and I could eat PB&J sandwiches during a death roll, no problem. Now there, the chief gave a satisfied grunt as clear bubbles shot forth again, some clicky mechanism having reset itself. He knelt over the edge of the pit. A few Seths swam calmly around the underwater platform that the chief had just been standing on. His tool belt was still jerked up beneath his soaked armpits. Chief, I said, bounding over. Dad, the ferry never showed. He looked up with a blind, irrational glare. The sun was behind me, but I was too short to block it. His arms were gloved in filth up to the elbows. Ava, you can't see I'm busy. Gus Waddle called from the docks. The ferry isn't coming today because Gus Waddle didn't have any passengers. Do you want me to go check the TV to see if something had happened on the mainland? Bad happened on the mainland? Ava Bigtree, he said, you are making me truly crazy. You can watch TV if you want. After cleaning the pit, the chief disappeared into the isolation tank to do some work with a recalcitrant bull gator a one-eyed, indiscriminately nasty fellow that kept biting not only the other alligators but also any driftwood or pond lily that floated up against his blind spot. Attacks which were scary but somehow also very embarrassing to watch. I hung around inside the empty stadium. It was a hot day, and the Seths slid through periphyton, and that's very bird, and a brownish orange algae that produced explosively in the Florida heat and could draw its pumpkin lace across the entire pit overnight. Everything else was pretty still. The gators are not your pets, Ava, the chief was always reminding me. That creature is pure appetite in a leather case. A Seth can't love you back. But I loved them, the dark, tapering mass of them. I feared them, too, their alien eyes and sudden bursts of speed. Chief Bigtree hung wooden memos bragging on them all over our park, many of them accurate. Alligators can run faster than Arabian horses on land. The alligator is an anachronism that can eat you. A Seth is a 180-million-year veteran of our planet. There's no show today, you dummies, I told the alligators over the railing. I rained out a bag of marbles and watched the planetary spin of them off the Seth's black shoulders. The chief said I could do this because the Seths use these marbles as gastroliths, and they use them to grind up prey in their gizzards, the way chickens use grit. And gastroliths allow crocodilians to float better, to settle their weight in the water. Our gators were born knowing exactly how much weight to swallow to find and keep their balance. I checked my watch on an ordinary day. We would be 5 minutes into our show by now. My dad would have waded into the pit water carrying a gator harness that he had made out of old airplane cables. He would have selected a sparring partner, a big, respectable sucker, and slid the rusty harness over the Seth's snout. The Seth, dripping in black, would fight like a fish inside that harness while the other gators continued switching throughout the sludgy pit, slow and pitiless inside their Seth oblivion. Once the chief hauled his Seth onto the stage, the real fight began. The Seth would immediately lurch forward, yanking the chief back into the water. The chief would pull him out again, and this tug-of-war would continue for a foamy length of time while the crowd whooped and wahooed, cheering for our species. To officially win an alligator wrestling match, you have to close both your hands around the gator's jaws. This was the hard part, getting your Seth's mouth to shut. Mom said that we girls were at a natural disadvantage because our hands were small. They could barely span a piano octave. But one curious fact about Seth physiognomy is this. While a Seth can close its jaws with 2,125 pounds per square inch of force, the force of a guillotine, the musculature that opens these same jaws is extremely weak. This is the secret a wrestler exploits to beat her adversaries. If you can get your Seth's jaws shut up in your fist, it is next to impossible for the creature to open them again. A girl's goody ribbon can tie off the jaws of a 400-pound bull gator. But we didn't just tape Seth's jaws and declare ourselves the victors. Our big tree show was special because we did tricks, too, and practiced some of the more dangerous holds. Before she died, Mom was in the middle of teaching me her advanced moves. The chin thrust, for example. A big tree standard to do the chin thrust. You made a lash out of your chin against the purse-like U of a Seth's jaws, tucking its broad snout against your throat like a botched kiss. Another good one was the silent night, where you covered the gator's eyes with your hands, fastened its snout with a tape, and then enlisted the help of Mom or the chief or Grandpa to flip it onto its back. This was a sorcery that put the alligator to sleep. Years later, I would learn that we were disrupting the alligator's otoliths, tiny sacs that connects the inner ear with the brain. We blacked them out. If you're an animal lover, I can tell you what the chief told us, that it was never a fair fight, that even taped and flipped, even sleeping, its legs churning toward an ultimate befuddlement in stillness. The alligator had all the real advantages, that an alligator can hoard its violence for millions and millions of years. A Seth could trick you into thinking it had died with a days-long freeze, a mortuary pose on a rock, and then do a lickety-split lunge and snatch an unwary turtle or a tiny ibis. The Seths had a ferocity that no wrestler could snuff for very long. The first and last time I tried to do a silent night, the alligator managed to right itself and bruised my entire right side with its thrashing tail, and Mom told the chief that I was still too young to perform the trick. I felt older now, though. Looking out at all the vacant stands, I felt like I had better become ready. What the tourists paid to watch, the chief always said, was an unequal fight, a little seesaw action, death life. The chief had long ago taught me a big tree strategy called peacocking weakness. All the best Seminole wrestlers use this strategy too. The true champions handicap themselves, the chief said, blindfolding their eyes or binding their dominant hand. Weakness was the feather with which you tickled your tourists. It was your weakness that pinned the tourists to their seats. They saw the puny size of you versus your alligator. They saw that you could lose. If you exploited this fact, you could float the outcome of your battle into the air over the stadium like a balloon. During the really scary family shows, the electric something goes awry times, I would picture it up there past just like the chief had said. Our fate, a translucent black balloon wobbling between the palm trees. You've got to remind the mainlanders that your alligator is a know-nothing dinosaur, Ava. The chief used to lecture me. Those bored, dead drylanders, they act like they think they're watching robots up here. You shake his head. You prove to them that you can lose. So you can surprise people, honey, and win. Now I wondered, would we ever do a show like that again? What if yesterday had been my last ever chance to wrestle? To surprise the mainland people. I leaned over the railing to the gator pit. The little bag felt weightless, and I realized that I was almost out of marbles. Oh, for heaven's sake, Ava Bigtree, don't be so melodramatic. Of course you will wrestle again. Today is a fluke. Of course the tourists will be back. I tried to give myself a lecture in my mother's stern voice. Then I used her same voice on the gators, who were blinking up at me stupidly from the pit. Eat up, you fools, because no one is coming, I hissed. Blue and gray marbles caught in their scales like stubborn bubbles. The big yellow shooter rolled around one Seth's scaly shoulders like a dollhouse sun. They all sank into the water and turned into gastroliths. Ava, what are you doing? Ossie's voice erupted through the speaker hooked up to the ticketing booth. Ha ha, did you lose your marbles? 2 weeks passed. The chief discovered that we couldn't even sell out the once-a-day wrestling show. We started performing for whoever showed up, wherever they came, and we were still getting a few confused Europeans clutching those expired travel guides with hydrangea pink spines and greeting my father with K and Qua. The chief and I cut 20 minutes from the show, but you could feel the tourist pity first, and then their distraction, their attention wandering the skies of the open stadium like kites. Without Mom and Grandpa Sawtooth, the whole show felt horribly incomplete to me. Tourists can't tell, the chief assured us, but it seemed like even the expressionless Seths had to know that something was missing. One Thursday, when the chief was in a black mood and caught a tourist yawning during his wrestling demonstration, he groaned loudly and released the Seth back to the water with a slap. Ta-da, he growled, standing up. That's all, folks. We were still calling this thing the Big Tree Wrestler Spectacular. I started to miss the same tourists I had always claimed to despise, the truculent seniors from Michigan, the ice-blonde foreign couples yoked into black, thick camera straps like teams of oxen, the fathers sweating everywhere with their trembling Jew mustaches, young mothers humping up and down the elevated walkway in the Swamp Cafe holding their babies aloft like blaring radios. Where had all the families gone? The families were gone. All at once, it felt like families had been our keystone species of tourists in Swamplandia. Now they were rarer than panthers. Red-eyed men with no kids in tow started showing up at the Saturday shows. Solitaries. Sometimes they debarked the ferry with perfume breath, already drunk. Sometimes they motored over from the Flamingo Marina in Loomis County on their own junker boats. And always they seemed far more interested in the cheap beer and the wood-smoked black racks of the fried frog legs than our tramway tours or alligator wrestling. Somehow Swamplandia seemed to have earned a truck stop reputation as a good place to get obliterated on a weekend night. One guy I found peeing on the side of our gift shop. The actual wall, even though the public bathrooms with the vault toilets were just a 5-minute walk down the trail. I hated them. When we had a crowd of these red eyes, the chief would not let me wrestle and perform the whole show himself. The chief liked most every tourist with a wallet, but he cooled on these guys. He blamed the world of darkness for them too. We'll get the families back, the chief promised us one night, after a particularly scary set of individuals had mobbed up to see our show. These guys drank so much beer that Gus and Kiwi had to help them back onto the ferry. I'd caught one of them throwing up into the bushes behind the museum. Another one had cozied up to the ticket booth window and whispered strange jokes to my sister, leaning on into his elbows like a grasshopper, so that from where I was standing it looked like he was trying to kiss her through the glass. The chief had started screaming at these men on the ferry dock, but now that we were home, he seemed angry with us. "What's wrong with you girls? You need to calm down." He patted Ossie stiffly. "Those clowns are gone. Those fools are just paying our rent until we get the families back. This is like bad weather, you understand. It's going to blow over." But I couldn't sleep, because what horizon did we think the sun was dropping into? If the world of darkness stayed open and Mom stayed in her grave, how exactly were we supposed to get the families back? We ate our dinners beneath a reticent crescent moon. The chief picked at his molars with a yellow toothpick. Kiwi read. Ossie kept her head down and ate off everybody's plates. She ate with her fingers, peeling colorless grains of rice off of Mom's blue tablecloth. But I couldn't stop imagining our fate up there. The black balloon, a thin globe of air clearly visible behind the toothy palms. I could see that balloon and the moon shining through it, but I couldn't begin to imagine what was going to happen to us. And the next video will be Chapter 2, The Advent of the World of Darkness, which is the other theme park. So there'll be another video next week for Chapter 2. Thanks.